Good morning, my name is Johan Däckmar and I'm going to talk a bit about things to think about when setting up a video and sound capture at home. So first of all, this that you're looking at right now, it's captured using a Logitech C922 and it's capturing in 720p. The first things to think about when setting up a camera is to make sure that it's in focus. This is an autofocus camera, so I don't need to think about that so much. Here's my dog. Vinka. Hey. Okay. So wherever I am, okay. Heavy dog. Wherever I am, if I'm far away from the camera or close, it's going to autofocus. So if I put my hands very close, then the fingerprint will basically start showing up when it's focusing. Come on, autofocus. Moving really close. Yeah, there we go. So this is basically what's called macro mode when it's super close. Often used when you're like taking pictures of bugs or something out in nature. But here I am like 1 meter in front of the camera, or maybe less. If I turn off autofocus, I can set it manually. And this is very important when you do not have an autofocus, because sometimes you have to like twist a bit on top of the camera, and that's going to maybe go from looking like this to looking something like this. So that's like step one. If you're not in focus, then you're not gonna even see any bad quality, because you're not gonna see anything. Secondly, we can look at what's called anti-flickering. And the anti-flickering is basically a function that is needed because the lights in like the ceiling, or for example, or the light here in front of me, is flickering all the time in 50 times per second. And that's because the electricity network is toggling back and forth 50 times a second. So if I open up my camera settings, we can have a look what happens if I turn it off. Right now it's set to 50 Hertz, and you see my white wallpaper, it's quite solid, and the back wallpaper is quite solid. But when I flip to 60 Hertz, it's a little bit hard to see, but it's kind of like waves going up on the wallpaper. It becomes a bit more apparent if there's maybe a bit lower light or worse quality, but you can kind of see waves going up a little bit behind me here. And if I turn it off now, then those wavy patterns stop. Yes. Moving on, the most important thing to get reasonable quality is lighting. And what most people do, or most people maybe do not adjust the lighting, and instead they take in light from the outside. And that's usually not a good idea. If I would be opening the blinds and letting in light from the outside, first of all, it would just hit one side of my face because I'm not entirely angled towards the window. And secondly, it would it would have a specific color. Basically, it would be kind of like blue light coming in, while my other lights are probably more white or a little bit yellow. But what you want to think about after blocking out the light from outside is that you want to have at least 2 light sources. One that is shining on you from the same angle as the camera, and one that is lighting up the background. And what I want to demonstrate here is a bit what happens if you don't have those things. So first of all, if I would turn off the ceiling light, then I'm still lit up, but you can kind of like see my shadow behind me when I'm moving, and it's also the wall, for example, and the walls start getting a bit grainy, and the quality is going down. And the reason for that is that the overall light in the picture has a higher range. I'm very bright and the rest of the room is very dark, so the camera is kind of compensating and trying to fit everything into the same picture, and that's gonna introduce noise. Miyako, stop playing. Basically what's happening when I'm lit up and the background is dark is that you start seeing a lot of grain. For example, if you're looking at my wall right now, it's becoming a bit more grainy. It will be perhaps more obvious if I turn on the ceiling light and turn off the light looking at me. Now my background is lit up, but I'm not. So now you're seeing a lot of grainy artifacts here on the wall. Basically all the dark or textured surfaces become very visibly noisy. So like it looks a bit like a TV test pattern overlaid on top of it. But just if I turn on the light to me, then all of a sudden the texture in the background becomes clear. And that's basically because the overall light is more uniform. So it's not like you have one bright thing and one dark thing and the camera needs to compensate to put them in the same picture. That means it doesn't have to like round off and get a lot of errors, which is causing noise. The second thing to think about here is that the angle of lighting will cause shadows if the lighting is coming from the wrong direction. And that's, for example, if I would let in light through the window instead. And I turn off the light that's towards me, then you see that half my face is lit up from the window. You can see the shadow coming here, and my other half is basically not being lit up. So that causes like shadows in the face, and you see, depending on what angle I have, you see the shadow of my nose and so on, and that leads to a bit worse quality, and it can be avoided by making sure that the light is coming from the camera instead of coming from like basically one direction, one other direction. It would be possible to avoid this if you have light coming from one side and then also from the other side. They would kind of like take each other out, but it's easier to set up maybe one light source straight in front of you and attach the camera to that one. And now that I do have the light coming from my lamp, I still have light coming in from the window, so I still have a little bit more light on one side of the face. So basically turn off the light sources that you cannot control to make sure that you're not being lit up from weird angles. Another thing to think about, once you start lighting up with lamps, there are quite different kinds of lamps. The one I have in front of me is a very diffuse lamp. It's a large surface, and I actually covered it with paper to make it even more diffuse. But to have a contrast, I could try to light up myself with a kind of like a desktop lamp instead. And what happens here is basically the same as when you're being lit up from the outside, like from the sun, but it's much more obvious. And here, because it's not diffuse light, it's more sharp light, that means you get very sharp shadows. So I could make like shadow puppets on my face, and also like all the 3D volume in the face causes shadows depending on how I move. Like if I look like this, something, you get like the obvious shadows next to the nose and the eyebrows, and you get like this angry mouth because yeah, cast shadows. And that's, you might want to have that look, but it's it probably causes a bit weird face recognition in people because they look very, very strange sometimes. Also, if you have like some props, like let's say a hat, then you get very, very dark shadows depending on how you move. And maybe that's your style, but it might look a bit weird. Like for the rim of the hat, for example, would cast a lot of shadows. So moving on to sound capture, I have a Yeti Blue, a microphone in front of me, and it's quite a big one. It has a few settings, and it's also possible to listen to what it's recording. And if I would be some sort of singer, then maybe I would be listening to myself. Like now it becomes very obvious that you're hearing me very well now, but when I'm talking in this angle, then then the sound goes way down. That's because it's set configured now to capture primarily in front, and not so much from the sides. These ones can also be configured to capture different setups, like a dialogue, one in front, one in back, or capture the whole room, and so on. And that's kind of the point here. Like, are you using a microphone that that only captures you, or are you using a microphone, for example, built into the webcam or built into your computer that has to capture the whole room? That becomes important if you're going further away, because all of a sudden you got this probably not so good microphone, but it's configured to capture the whole room, and the sound will be a bit affected by that. I could try to switch to my webcam microphone. So now this one is the one being used, and not this one. And now I switch back to the Yeti Blue, just to hear the sound difference. You might be wondering what's on top here. This is actually not standard. This is what's called a pop filter. So if I sit very close and speak into the microphone, then whenever I would say some P sound or some T, then you're pushing air out through the mouth, and that makes like this blowing sound. So these blowing sounds are picked up very easily, and they kind of disturb. It's not an enormous difference, but if you're real close, it's gonna make some improvement to have a pop filter. Another thing to think about is called gain. It's maybe easier to think about it as the input volume. For example, now my microphone is set as maximum gain, and if I turn it down, it will basically go silent until it's on 0, and then I go up from 0 all the way to max. So the input, you don't use the input volume to set how loud it should be for the people listening to you. Instead, the people listening to you will have their own volume to turn it up and down. But you could use the gain to make sure, if you have multiple microphones, that they are adapted quite well to each other, so you don't have like one person sounding a lot and then other people sounding less. And also, in some cases, it could be good to turn it down just a little bit so it doesn't pick up so much noise around it. All right. In case you go for a high budget recording, you most likely have multiple microphones and a mixer board or sound card that allows you to basically merge all of these different audios into one. But in that case, it's becomes much more apparent how to configure this. Lastly, basically the only way to know how you sound and know how to position yourself and how to angle the microphone and configure it is to listen to yourself. And one way is to, with such a microphone, you can plug it in, but you can also record yourself and listen in what angles it sounds well, and kind of like how loud you should speak, and how yeah, if you are in such a situation where it needs to pick up your instrument, for example, or it needs to pick up something in the background, then making sure that those levels are kind of matching each other, because it doesn't just happen automatically. You really need to make sure that you configure it correctly and think about what it should capture and what it should not capture. All right, take care.